Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. This time we have something truly special for you, courtesy of the good offices of a local collector, the Dardik pistol. The Dardik pistol has been called a collection of bad ideas flying in loose formation. And I think that's not unfair. As you can see, it is a very weird shape. And it is, in a sense, both a revolver and a semi-automatic, which is every bit as weird as it sounds. What the gun has is a magazine fixed in the butt and a 3-chambered rotating cylinder here, this part, which, as you can see, is rotated by the trigger pull. So that this side is exposed in the course of operation. There are actually reasons that the inventor thought this was a good idea, and we'll get into those in this video. In 1949, David Dardik, the inventor, had a notion that there was something wrong with machine guns. Stay with me here. And that's the bolt moving back and forth, the fixed chamber soaking up heat the more you fired. There's a lot of wear and tear built into the system, and he thought there might be a better way. And a rotating breech with 3 chambers could do it. One chamber would load while one was firing and one was ejecting. Seems pretty efficient. But for this to really work and to have less mechanical wear and fewer moving parts, the sides of the chamber had to be open, and that presents an obvious problem. His solution was the invention of this, the Tround. This is a 50 caliber machine gun Tround with a fully telescoped cartridge, and it is made out of a composite material called Fortiflex. It has a brass insert holding the primer at this end, powder in the middle, and a bullet at the other end. You can see the bullet in this example where it has been partially pulled, and that is a big 50 caliber 720 grain jacketed projectile. And this is quite powerful. Now, in actual testing at China Lake Naval Weapons Center, the machine gun showed great promise. You could attain a very high rate of fire. And because a cylinder or a chamber is only firing one time in 3 shots, things stayed much cooler than a conventional machine gun. And it had a lot of promise, but it didn't have a lot of enough promise to outweigh the fact that we had millions of rounds of 50 caliber BMG left over from World War II, and that everybody was already set up to produce it. So in 1954, Dardik applied for a patent on a self-loading revolving chamber handgun, and that was granted in 1958, whereupon they immediately went into production. So several guns resulted from this, one of which was the Model 2000, which held 20 rounds of ammunition in a rather large hand grip. The 1500, which held 15 rounds and is by far the most common. And the 1100, which holds 11 rounds and was a rather slightly more compact version. It's not actually very compact at all. So, this is the 1100, has a shorter grip, and it's very weird. We're going to have to go to the tabletop for this one because it beggars my ability to describe in adequate detail. Okay, that wasn't too terribly difficult. So, you can see the chamber rotates, theoretically to the point where it can lock in place. And then, when you pull the trigger the next time to fire the next round, it kicks out the empty. At least, that's the theory. We'll have to see. The outer casing is in two parts and was manufactured for them by Alcoa Aluminum, which I'm sure was suitably futuristic. The plastic grips are simply glued in place, and you can see the D and C for Dardik Corporation, which have been made triangular to reflect the Trounds. There's no external safeties. There are, in fact, no external controls, but for the hammer, the trigger, and the magazine cover release. And no, there is no replaceable magazine. The gun is actually quite thick through here also. There is a magazine that runs up the inside of this side of the clamshell and then turns to, well, this point. And when you pull it apart, which Ian at Forgotten Weapons did a very comprehensive video on this, which showed normal taking apart. Well, theoretically, the Trounds sit in the magazine and nest so that they don't take up as much room as a conventional cartridge. Of course, they're bigger than a conventional cartridge, so it's kind of a wash. Now, here you can see the original manual for the Switch Hitter series. Oh, grow up. These were convertible to .22 long rifle, at least in theory. And you can see there was the model 1500 offered, and with 15 cartridges. And here you can see a diagram of the magazine, how the cartridges nest, and the 3-shot chamber, which for some strange reason shows a cartridge that didn't eject and no cartridge being fired. I don't know. So here's the diagram that shows how it's supposed to work, where one feeds in, is rotated to the firing position and fired, and then is expelled as the chamber rotates further. And here is an image of the cartridge, which has a bullet, a plastic seal, powder, and of course the primer inside the nylon Tround ammunition. And they did one thing right. They manufactured a lot of ammunition for these. Oh, and here's the 22 or 38 caliber conversion to make it into a carbine that won't work. So very versatile. You had a lot of options for a non-functional gun. And I say a non-functional gun because these are famously unreliable. And this one is doing everything in its power to live up to that reputation. Now, the Trounds fired by the pistol. This is an original Tround, which appears to have a firing pin strike on it, and appears to have not detonated because they were kind of famous for that too. They did make a lot of ammunition though, because they felt if the gun was going out there, people would want to be able to buy the ammunition. And so they were sold in a pack of 20, made of Celanese Fortiflex, whatever the hell that is. And they came packed thusly in the box of 20. But again, the Trounds are sort of famously unreliable. But they are much more common than the guns, of which the best information I can come across says they actually only made 40 or 50 of these. Now, the good news is if you do have one, you can get all the spare parts you want, because Numeric Arms in 1962, after they'd gone out of business, bought all the remaining stocks of parts and hardware, which was a very good thing because it meant you can now still buy parts. There are more parts than there are guns by a fairly large margin. Numeric did try to make a something of this nature that would accept a 9mm cartridge, but they were not very successful. And we don't know if that's the cartridge's fault or the fact that the guns are horribly unreliable. Now, while the ammunition is still readily available, although not inexpensive. It's not a good idea to actually fire it because whatever the case is made out of, get that centered, sorry. Whatever the case is made out of did not age well, and you tend to get things like this, where the case has split and extruded part of itself into the mechanism, which undoubtedly jammed the weapon. So, you can get the ammo, don't shoot it. Now, the .22 caliber conversion came with an empty Tround that had a .22 long rifle chamber in it, and you could simply replace the barrel, turn this screw from CF for center fire to RF for rim fire, and it would move where the firing pin struck so that it would strike the rimfire cartridges. An awful lot of these guns were made, however, without the actual part inside that could change the location of the firing pin for rimfire, so I'm not sure what that was all about. The sights are either this fairly decent adjustable sight, which has little wheels to adjust elevation and windage, or a completely useless folding sight that would flip up, that you could flip up. And God knows why, like so many things with this gun, God knows why anybody ever thought that was a good idea. It wasn't. Now, the Model 1100 is quite rare. I have only ever seen or even heard of this one. And it's uncertain how many of the 40 or 50 guns produced were Model 1100s. I suspect very, very few. So, trying to think if there's anything else to tell you. Big, bulky, but ugly. Horribly unreliable. I think we've covered most things. So, there we have the Dardik Model 1100. The owner has had these small aluminum sleeves made in the shape of a Tround, so that in theory one can insert a .38 special cartridge and fire it through the Dardik. Let's say my confidence isn't high. Now, he did only provide one of these sleeves, but given the unlikelihood of the gun functioning twice in a row, I don't think that's going to be a problem. So, let's open the magazine, push the follower down, insert the Tround, which isn't that easy. It has caught. And we are theoretically ready to fire. So, we are cocked. The cylinder seems to have rotated. Here we go. What a shock. It did eject nicely. And you can see a very, very gentle impression of the firing pin on the primer. Let's try it again. And we have an issue. Who'd have thought? Okay, the chamber appears to be in place and locked. And cock the hammer, and it ejects the round. It does eject quite forcefully, which is a good thing. Let's keep trying this. Who knows? We could get lucky. And we're doing that again. It's hard to understand why these weren't more popular. Okay. Now, honestly, this might have worked a little better with the correct ammunition, which this is not. So, it appears to have worked that time, and it hasn't fired. It is just not hitting that firing pin with any force at all. All right, the owner has suggested that we attempt firing with the 6-inch barrel fitted. So why not? Once again, the cartridge into the Tround adapter. Fitted into the gun. Off the hammer. And the same result. Except this time it's jammed, so that I'll have to jiggle with it to get it to eject. Which is going to take place off camera. Okay, with the jam cleared, I am nothing if not persistent. One disadvantage of the Trounds, by the way, is you have to actually pay attention not to load them backwards because they fit backwards just as well as they do forwards. Theoretically, that wouldn't be that big a deal because you could manually eject the unfired round if the gun worked. Try it again. And we're jammed again. I think we need to just give this up as a bad job. Dang it, and I was so looking forward to shooting this. Dardik tried to interest law enforcement in this gun, and you can see why. Most of them held 15 rounds at a time when the average police revolver held 5 or 6, and there really weren't a lot of high-capacity semi-automatic options. Really, the only thing out was the Browning High Power, which had a 13-round magazine. So 15 rounds of the equivalent of 38 Special could have been appealing. Except the guns are in no way a good idea. And there's speculation that the only reason they went into production with the handguns was to try and finance further work on the machine gun. But if you see, this is bulky as hell. It's asymmetrical, and this bulge on each side is perfectly placed to interfere with your grip, with your thumb. So it's not particularly comfortable to hold. It's not uncomfortable, but it's not what you would call ergonomic. So, weird concept, special ammo, bad ergonomics, and extremely unreliable. What's not to love? Apparently, all of those things, because they were in production for approximately 1 year, and then they were gone. And sometimes I regret when a novel approach to firearms doesn't make it. Not this time. This is an awful gun. But because they were only in production for a year, they are worth a small fortune. And it was very, very kind of my collector friend to loan me this for this review. So, sorry I couldn't do more than badmouth it, but really this is a gun utterly without redeeming features or characteristics. It's just a bad idea taken too far. So, on that relative bombshell, which I'm sure surprises nobody familiar with these guns, that's it for this time. Please be sure to click like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you feel so motivated, please consider clicking the link below and supporting me on Patreon, because every little bit helps, and we could all use some help now and again. So, until next time, take care, stay safe. We'll talk to you again real soon.